Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the second annual announcement of the Aspen Literary Prize. I'm Dan Porterfield, the President and CEO of the Aspen Institute, and I'm honored, thank you. The good news is that all that clapping is going to be even more deserved in a few minutes as we bring up our extraordinary director, Adrienne Brodeur, and then our five authors. I would like to please join me in thanking Adrienne and the entire staff of Aspen Words, making this evening possible. We do have the best team in literary culture, but it's probably also the best jobs to be working at Aspen Words, and we're very proud of all that the program represents. And I'd like to also thank my colleague, our Executive Vice President, Elliot Gerson, that provides leadership for all of our policy programs, and this year was one of our distinguished judges, which means he read 16 great works of literature, while also doing a lot of other things for the Aspen Institute. So thank you, Elliot, wherever you are out there. So we're thrilled to celebrate the best in contemporary literature. Authors who invite us to engage questions of justice, freedom, fairness, equity, and inclusion. Values that we cherish and protect, not for one time, but for all time. I'd like to say congratulations to all of our finalists who are joining us, and thank you to all of our judges, our partners, National Public Radio. A special thank you to Renee Montang, special host and correspondent for NPR News, and tonight's moderator. Please join me in thanking all those people making it possible. We probably should be thanking the parents and families of the novelists, too. There's so many people to thank, but we can hold on that for now. The Aspen Words Literary Prize recognizes fiction of enduring literary excellence that has the power to broaden minds and build empathy around critical human, social, and global issues. The prize reflects the values of our organization, which was founded 7 decades ago in the aftermath of genocide and world war, and dedicated to the proposition that humanistic inquiry and discussion are the beating heart of a free, just, and equitable society. Today, the Aspen Institute hosts more than 60 programs of many different types working to foster dialogue, to empower young people, to elevate emerging voices, to protect the environment, to preserve open societies here and around the world, to create good jobs, and so much more. We're an optimistic organization, believing that each of us can make a difference and all of us should try. We use many different methods to make those differences: research, leadership development, practical problem solving, and of course, circulating ideas. Not surprisingly, the Aspen Institute is quite the home for writers. Soon, you'll have an opportunity to read Adrienne's much anticipated memoir, Wild Game. It's going to be... And maybe we'll have a panel discussion of Aspen writers next October when that one hits the world. You can sit there and discuss writing with, say, Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State and the author of the historical meditation, Fascism, A Warning, her newest book. Or another Aspen writer is the incandescent Anna DeVere Smith, whose most recent work, Notes from the Field, makes the poverty-to-prison pipeline undeniably human. All this work, and certainly the Aspen Words Literary Prize, is really about awakening moral imagination. That's what we do, and that's what we celebrate today, and it's what's so desperately needed in our country and in our world. It's moral imagination that allows us to know to our core that each human being has equal dignity and that no one is more human than anyone else. And it's moral imagination that sparks us to become the active agents of community, participants and not spectators in the fitful art form of a working democracy. Tonight, we celebrate 177 authors whose works were nominated because those authors were participants in that art form known as democracy. 16 of those authors made the long list, although many more could have, and of course we have our 5 exceptional finalists. And those finalists are, and please join me in recognizing them. First is Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing at all. Please join me in congratulating Nana for being here. David Chariandy is here tonight. Thank you, David, and congratulations. Jennifer Clement is here tonight. Congratulations, Jennifer. Tayari Jones is here. Thank you. Congratulations. And finally, Tommy Orange is here this evening. Beautifully written, their novels bring light and heat, making meaning from pain, reminding us to drop our veils and just look at one another with open eyes and open minds. To our authors, thank you for the long days and nights, thinking and sketching, writing and revising, thrashing away, journeying with both your imagined characters and your envisioned readers, in the hope that making a work of art will do justice to them both. You've awakened moral imagination. Thank you so much. Now may I ask Adrian to come to the mic.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all so much for being here tonight. James Baldwin famously said, "Artists are here to disturb the peace." And these 5 finalists have disturbed the peace in the best possible way by forcing us to look at aspects of our society and ourselves that we might not really want to look that closely at. I truly believe that writers are some of the bravest people in the world, and I'm in awe at the imagination, ambition, and sheer effort it took to create these 5 beautiful works of fiction. So congratulations again to our finalists. But before we get to the main event, I have some important thank yous to bestow. And please bear with me and withhold your clapping until the very end. I will try to be quick. First up, thank you to all of you who are in publishing. While writing is a solitary affair, I think we know that ushering a book into the world is a collaborative endeavor. So thank you to the agents, to the publishers, to the editors, the publicists, the marketing people, the jacket designers. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of you, but thanks to everyone who worked so hard to bring these beautiful books to life. Next, thank you to our selection committee, Ploy Pirapokin, Douglas Farrar, and Dinah Zeiger. The 177 books that were nominated for this prize did not read and rate themselves. This was accomplished by the Herculean effort of this committee, who managed to winnow down that enormous pile of books into just an exceptional long list of 16. Next, thank you to our judges, Dorothy Allison, Suzanne Bober, Elliot Gerson, Farah Jasmine Griffin, and our head judge, who was also a finalist for the prize last year, Samrat Upadhyay. And I know it was not an easy job to select these 5 finalists, and I cannot imagine how they picked a winner. Thanks to everyone here who supports Aspen Words, our donors, board members, Creative Council, Society of Fellow Members, and in particular, thanks to the anonymous donors whose extraordinary gift has endowed this prize in perpetuity. Thanks also to our friends who are watching via our live stream, wherever you are, particularly to those of you who are at the viewing party at the Pitkin County Library in Aspen. Thank you for tuning in. And lastly, I'd like to thank the remarkable team at Aspen Words, Carolyn Torrey, Marie Kahn, Elizabeth Nix, Ellie Scott, and Julie Cummins. These individuals work tirelessly on behalf of our mission to encourage writers and inspire readers and connect people through their stories. So now please join me in giving a hand to everyone. And for those of you who don't know everything you need to know about Aspen Words, here is a very short video about our programs and history.
Friday Black is a debut short story collection that awakens us to the absurd realities of racism, school shootings, and consumerism. It's published by Mariner Books, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. David Chariandy. Brother is a novel about those relegated to the margins because of their class, color, and immigrant status, who nonetheless strive to create a better world for themselves. It's published by Bloomsbury. Jennifer Clement. Gun Love explores violence, poverty, and gun culture in America through the eyes of a 14-year-old girl who grows up in the front seat of a car. Published by Hogarth. Tayari Jones. An American Marriage illuminates the injustices of the criminal justice system on African American families through the story of a wrongful incarceration and the dissolution of a marriage, published by Algonquin Books. And finally, Tommy Orange. A debut novel told from the perspective of urban Indians, There explores questions of identity, tradition, and the scars left by America's treatment of its native people, published by Knopf. Now I'd like to invite Carolyn Torrey, Aspen Words Associate Director, to stage to introduce the moderator.
Thank you, Samra, and welcome to our finalists. One of the great pleasures of working on this award has been partnering with National Public Radio. NPR is a trusted source of news, but they also advance the cultural dialogue through all of their arts and ideas coverage. It's the place we tune in for a great book recommendation or author interview. So thank you to Ellen Silva and her entire team who, amidst a nonstop news cycle this year, have championed great fiction with us. Tonight's moderator, Renee Montaigne, represents the very best of NPR journalism. She is a special correspondent and host for NPR News and co-hosted Morning Edition and All Things Considered. Her most recent assignment has been a year-long collaboration with ProPublica called Lost Mothers, which was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and has won almost every award in American journalism. Please join me in welcoming Renee Montaigne to the stage.
To see you all, and I have to say I'm honored to be here and also really honored to be on this stage with these five wonderful, wonderful writers. There's one question I'd like to, I'm going to be of course asking the questions, but I'm hoping you'll talk among yourselves. My job is to make my job invisible. But the first question I want to ask, I'd like all of you to answer if you don't mind. And that has to do with what makes the Aspen Words Literary Prize unique. And that is that it not only honors really some really fine fiction, some really great fiction, but it's also fiction that addresses vital issues of our time. So I think the question that would apply to every one of you, although your works are so different, has to do with, because each of your books does exactly that, what is it that in what way do you engage with the two things, the writing, the literature part of it, and also the issues that are woven in so beautifully in all these books, novels and short stories? Why don't I start with you, Nana, because you're at the very end.
Sure.
I mean, it's a bit of a challenge, right? Or maybe not.
In some ways it is. I mean, first, thanks everybody for coming out. This is nice. I can't see like most people, but still, I can feel that they're there. For me, you know, like it's kind of connected to the question of like the political, why like, you know, writing this sort of maybe political form. And I get that question often, like, why are your stories so political? And what I often say is, you know, I'm not gonna, sort of if the house is on fire, I'm not gonna write about what's in the fridge. And that's kind of a way for me to say that this is, the things I write about are what I have to write about. You know, if I had a choice, you know, I would maybe write something else. But, you know, whether it's racism or sort of our kind of, I don't know, sort of sinister consumerism, it's the life that I know. And so it'd be actually difficult for me to write something else and really feel fully engaged. So it kind of is what comes when I'm really closely, I don't know, connected to the work. It feels sort of like it has a bent towards engaging these issues that you're talking about. Yeah.
We'll leap into the middle. Jennifer, and then.
Well, I would say that, you know, mostly I write about things that won't let go of me. So there's things sort of in the world that hurt on some level. But I'm also intellectually aware of the role of the novel in history as a place that has actually created social change. And many times, if we look back, we don't remember any of the journalism of the time, but we do remember the novels. And so I definitely believe in them as a place where social change can occur, which is why this is so special. And I also want to say how honored I am to be here with everyone and these wonderful fellow writers, and with you.
I know that we're going around, but let me inject one thing to maybe the other three of you. Do either of these two things come first? You're going to write something, but you find yourself caught up in the issues, or you have an idea of an issue, and you feel, which I'm thinking a little bit of you, David, the issue maybe being immigration, the poverty of this neighborhood that I know you come from. So you in a way, might have started from an issue because as a perch to then to write. But what is, what?
Well, I'm also really honored to be here among the finalists and here in this city, among in front of this audience. I love it. I always learn something when someone asks a question like that. You know, how do you connect the political and the literary? And I find the responses always fascinating, especially from writers I deeply admire, and these are writers I deeply admire. But to tell the truth, I don't understand the distinction. There's an author I deeply admire, Dion Brand, who wrote a poem, and in that poem is the line, "Every word leaps with the pulse of history." And I think that's what language is. It's impossible to be attentive to language. It is impossible to tell a story. It is impossible to craft a story that comes from a specific perspective and represents a specific consciousness without being political, without being socially aware, I believe. Or you're not being a good writer. And so that's, I think I would say that I'm simply trying to write well. And what that does is attune me to the political, to the social. That's how I attempt to be responsible socially, by writing as best as I can.
Tayari?
Well, I was reared in a very political home. Like in the early 80s, remember when people were saying that if Reagan got elected, they were going to leave the country? My parents left the country. And so we were reared with an idea that, you know, you could be whatever you wanted to be as long as whatever you chose to do with your life, you did it in the service of justice. So when it was time for me to become a writer, I never considered whether or not I would engage political issues. I understood that to be my life's work. But when I was a young writer, I would think about how to make sure that my political views, the social critique, made its way into the writing. But I came to realize later that that's my worldview, that anything I write is going to be infused with that worldview. And I was able to just kind of relax a little bit and instead of trying to make a point, tell the truth, because the point is in the truth.
I feel like political as a word is so layered and charged, and in some ways meaningless. Like I wanted to write a novel, and I wanted to speak through the experience that I've had, and that ended up feeling very political once the questions started being asked. But during the writing process, I wasn't thinking about, I'm making a statement for this or this reason. Like, what is political is related to power dynamics, and people who are born and raised sort of in resistance to a dominant power dynamic automatically are politically positioned just by being born and starting to say anything or do anything. So it's not something that entered my mind when writing. It's certainly part of the dialogue that we're having now. And you know, my book was very much, my book's ascendancy has followed Trump's in a really disturbing way. My agent read it like days after he was elected, and was like, this gave me hope in that time. And I was in London for the launch there, and I saw a blimp of baby Trump in the sky, and it just felt like there was some weird parallel that I didn't want to be on, but I had to be on.
Well, everyone has their books with them, and so we maybe get even 30, 45 seconds of a taste of the literature part of it. But also, it would be good to elaborate a bit on the stories, because none of us can really see you all because the lights are so bright. But if I asked you to raise your hands, anybody who's read Beyond the Judges, all 5 books, I think I might. You've read all 5 books? Oh, I'm so glad. Well, good. But there are those, I won't ask you to raise your hand, who haven't. You know, at least some. So I'm going to start, though, actually, with you, Tommy. you have a choice, you all have choices of reads. I had this idea you could open any one of your books, close your eyes, drop a pin down, and anything that was there would be worth you all hearing. But would you do a little quick reading? And I think it's the prologue, because it does actually go to this issue, which we can then drop, of, focusing on something that you care a lot about. And in most of your cases, not everyone, but has to do with your own community in some sense.
I'll just say briefly before I read this particular section of the prologue. I was working at a nonprofit in Oakland, working with Native youth on a suicide prevention grant. And at the end of that particular grant, there was an author reading, and my wife was the project director, and she invited me / made me be an author. And I was like, I'm not an author, but she was the project director. So it was a year after beginning to write the book, and these were like Native teenagers from Oakland, and I'm like, they do not want to hear anything that I have to say. But after the end of it, they were very moved, and normally we did a lot of different programming with them, and they didn't have that much reaction, but they were like, pretty emotional about it, and that like really propelled me forward for the next 5 years writing it, was that experience. So this is part of what I wrote that they were reacting to. This is from the prologue. There's a subtitle called Urbanity. Urban Indians were the generation born in this city. We've been moving for a long time, but the land moves with you like memory. Urban Indians feel at home walking in the shadow of a downtown building. We came to know the downtown Oakland skyline better than we did any sacred mountain range, the redwoods in the Oakland hills better than any deep wild forest. We know the sound of the freeway better than we do rivers, the howl of distant trains better than wolf howls. We know the smell of gas and freshly wet concrete and burned rubber better than we do the smell of cedar or sage or even fry bread, which isn't traditional, like reservations aren't traditional. But nothing is original. Everything comes from something that came before, which was once nothing. Everything is new and doomed. We ride buses, trains, and cars across, over, and under concrete plains. Being Indian has never been about returning to the land. The land is everywhere or nowhere.
There's a lot of funny stuff in that book, though, too, as you can tell by hearing Tommy. That book gets to something, though, which is that when we read these books, we discover, I should say we because here I am sitting here like I discovered these communities. Of course, the communities exist and don't, in their own way, and within themselves, need to be discovered. But it's a good thing for the world that these books are out there. And some of the, I'd have you read let me hold off on the read, I might have you read it afterwards. But David, your community, talk to us about that. There's some funny, there's names, there's nicknames for it that are witty and might give you an idea.
So the book is set in Toronto, where I was born and raised, but more specifically a suburb of Toronto named Scarborough. And it's
people call it
Scarborough, Scarlum, Scarberia, as in Scarborough. I guess
people there.
Yeah, people there, but even more so people not from Scarborough. So it had a reputation for being a very undesirable place to live, a reputation for crime and danger and social ills of all sorts. And it's, not surprisingly, it's comprised of, working class and working poor people, significantly of immigrant backgrounds, visible minorities. And so I guess, I grew up in that place and felt that negative gaze upon the place that I grew up in. And I guess I wanted to, in certain ways in this book, tell this story about the often unappreciated beauty and life of that place, even when it is a story about loss and unjust circumstances. But I think that for me was extremely important to pay homage to beauty, creativity, resilience. Young men who seen by people outside the community as threats, but who are braving every day great acts of tenderness and love. And so, that's what I wanted to get at.
So one might think the heart of it is and it certainly is, the death of, well, the title character, the brother. Yeah. It's you realizing your community to the world. I mean, did you think that when you were growing up that this was a community that had been written about, or you? No,
I guess not. I guess there was no Scarborough literature, and I guess I had to overcome that in a sense. I mean, I think my sense is that a lot of writers, have to overcome this sense that what you know and what you've experienced and what you feel is worthy of literature. And that's, I would agree that that's a powerfully, actually, political moment, but it's also a moment in which you're thinking about, then how do I represent that? How do I do that in a form that is true to that experience and not simply a form that someone else thinks is literature?
Why don't you read just the first page?
Yeah. So this is two brothers. Sorry, is it working?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
No.
Check.
Your mic's out.
Is it working now? Okay, sorry. So these are two brothers. They're both pretty young. They're children, and it's the younger brother who is speaking. Once he showed me his place in the sky, that telephone pole in a parking lot all weed broke and abandoned. Looking up, you'd see the dangers of the climb, the feeder lines on insulators, the wired bucket called a pole pig, the footholds rusted bad and going way into a sky cut hard by live cables. You'd hear the electricity as you moved higher, he warned me. Feel it shivering your teeth and lighting a whole city of fear inside your head. But if you made it to the top, he said, you were good. All that free air and seeing, the streets below, suddenly patterns you could read. A great lookout, my brother told me, one of the best in the neighborhood, but step badly on a line, touch your hand to the wrong metal part while you're brushing up against another, and you'd burn. Hang, scarecrow stiff and smoking in the air, dead black sight for all. You want to go out like that, he asked? So when you climbed, he said, you had to go careful. You had to watch your older brother and follow close his moves. You had to think back on every step before you took it, remembering hard the whole way up. He taught me that, my older brother. Memories got nothing to do with the old and gray and far away gone. Memories the muscle sting of now, a kid reaching brave in the skull hum of power. And if you can't memory right, he said, you lose.
Okay, so this was an experience reading these books when I discovered how to clean guns. I know you need oil, you need a toothbrush, you need solvent, and a soft cloth. I learned how important an onion can be in prison, and how you can make a particular casserole of ramen noodles, crushed Doritos, Vienna sausages, and that precious onion. I learned a lot of things that I suspect that maybe you all here had to also find out for yourselves in the process of writing these books. That is to say, research. So let me start with, I think I'll start with, I guess, how about an American marriage, Tayari, because the research would be very subtle, but sort of jumped on it when I saw the noodle recipe or the onion recipe, because I thought, did you find that from someone? I mean, did you search for it?
Actually, I was talking to someone who had been in prison, and he just casually mentioned that now that he's no longer in prison, he doesn't like Doritos, and it was because they would use them to make this dish. But what I was struck by when he was telling me that was how everybody would bring something different to make this kind of, I guess it's a makeshift casserole together. But then I was also aware of my position as kind of feeling a little bit romantic about it. You know, this idea of these men who have nothing, each of them foraging to find something to make this, communal thing. But he just remembers it as substandard food. And that was an important kind of check on me as I was writing this book, to remember the everydayness of people's lives, and that other people want to eat the same type of food that I want to eat. Like it wouldn't be romantic for me to eat that, so it can't be romantic for him to eat that.
Jennifer, though, you too, the guns I got from you, because, research was important to you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly for this book, I think of it a bit like an iceberg. I mean, what you read in the novel is the tip of a lot of research that actually began with journalism. I wrote some pieces on the NRA that were journalistic pieces. So I was already, very disturbed and really had to understand it deeply. So yeah, I had to study how to clean guns and things like that.
Because it involved gun running. It was a 14-year-old girl, but she's caught up in this world. She's not a gun runner. But.
Well, what many people don't know, and I think this is one of the things that really tugs on my heart, is that so much of the violence in Central America and in Mexico is fueled by U.S. guns. So as a very small, sort of modest figure, the estimate is 20,000 guns cross the border every day. And so this isn't spoken about very much, but for us who live there, we're very aware of the fact that, we're just swimming in guns, and it's fueling all these problems.
Yeah. Well, one of your characters says, a boy says to the Pearl, the young girl, there are 2 bullets for every person on the planet. That's true. And that's what he said, that's true. Yeah. So I Googled it because I wondered if it was true or the character had made it up. But it actually is true.
Yeah.
Which is, you like to think it also, but also, Tommy, for you, you read that prologue, and very much of the very beginning, the prologue is a history lesson. It's sad, an awful history lesson, but something that people wouldn't know. Is that something you grew up knowing, or did you, really have to do a little studying?
The story that I heard most growing up from my dad was the Sand Creek Massacre story, which is in the prologue. And it was only recently that I realized he wasn't telling us a massacre story. It was a naming story. So he got his name. He doesn't have a middle name, but his Indian name's Whitebird. And he got it because that day there was a young boy who saved a relative of ours. And when there's a certain naming tradition where you switch names with somebody if something significant happens. And so this is how he got his name, was this name switch, because somebody handed off a baby to this young boy who saved one of our relatives during the massacre. And so...
And the massacre?
The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, in November 29th, where there was a private militia out of Colorado and Denver that killed over 200, mostly women, children, and elders. The men weren't there. And there was a very specific treaty, and there was an American flag and a white flag flown that people sort of gathered around to be we made this agreement, right? And they had these howitzers, and just a lot of people died in a really horrific way. But I grew up thinking why does my dad keep telling us this story? And it wasn't about the massacre or it is a sort of we have to remember this, but he was telling a naming story. It was essentially just a naming story.
Nana, your book would seem the least involved in research. I think, not to say it is, I'm just saying because it is, I don't know if in describing it if any of these words were used, but at different points, dystopian, surreal, sort of magic realism. I mean, you have a twin fetuses chatting with the father who's just, you know, they've been aborted.
Yeah.
Show up on his pillow. And you have a terrifying story in the beginning, the Finkelstein Five. It's a real shocker, you know. The book isn't all about that, but it's of 5 African, it takes what's really happening and takes it way out there. And the sad part is we're all sort of scared because everything seems way out there now compared to 15 years ago. Hopefully this would never happen, but young children beheaded and nobody pays. I mean, there's a story that, I don't know what you were gonna read, but maybe you could read something and then just talk about writing in that way where the subtext is, you know, Friday Black itself is Black Friday taken to its potentially logical and horrifying conclusion.
Yeah, so maybe I'll read just
yeah.
something small, the last page, spoiler alert, I guess. It's a collection, so it doesn't matter. And then I'll speak to that question a little bit. And talking about the sort of maybe surreal, strange, you know, weirdness of these stories. In this story, this sort of particular town is locked in a space where every day sort of ends in nuclear fallout. And they're kind of living in this loop over and over and over again. And slowly, over, I guess, you know, maybe hundreds of years, they're starting to become aware that they're in that loop. You know, regular stuff. Okay. And this is the very end, where they've kind of made a ritual of like watching what they call the flash, which is that nuclear sort of explosion. There's a faraway light, then a roar like long, slow thunder. The roar doesn't stop, it gets louder. And then it's so loud you can't hear anything. The faraway light grows and it's yellowish at first. And in the beginning, it looks like something that's meant to help you, like another sun. Then it grows taller than any building, greater than a mountain. You can see it's eating the world, and no matter what, it's coming for you, rushing toward you. And by that time, it's blinding. You are terrified and humbled. Watching it, you know it's the kind of thing you should only get to see once. Something that happens once and then never again. We've all seen it so many times, but I still cry. Because when it comes, I know for sure we are infinite. All you feel is infinite. Knowing all the falls and leaps and sweet and death that's ever been will be trumped by the wall of nuclear flying at you. You of all people. Then, before you're gone, you know that all that's ever been will still be, even if there are no tomorrows. Even the apocalypse isn't the end. That you could only know when you're standing before a light so bright it obliterates you. And if you're alone, posed like a dancer when it comes, you feel silly and scared. And if you are with your family or anyone at all when it comes, you feel silly and scared, but at least not alone. So that's that.
But at least not alone. Yeah, this is something, you go ahead and talk about this though, the writing in those particular different forms that aren't natural, it's not naturalistic. And also, maybe everybody can jump in on this because that reminds me that all of these books have hope. All of them in there, absolutely. And you do too in other stories, very much so.
Right, and I can maybe I'll start with that part of it, the hope question. And a lot of these stories are pretty brutal. You know, a lot of them are pretty violent. And you know, often people think about, but you still find a way of injecting hope. And why is that so important? And you know, to me, I think as a writer, as I'm starting to think about my own work more, you know, that relationship between like really real toughness, real maybe horror and hope. You know, I think they actually sort of need each other. That is, you know, I think maybe in America especially, we sort of get used to this sort of jumping to hope without ever actually looking at the real issue. Jumping to sort of this idea of hope and sort of prayer and the sort of mythical, everything will get better if we just say it without really thinking about the actual reality. And so for me, the road to hope is traversed through this horror. And it's through like a real appreciation, being willing to actually see that. So for me, that's, to me, I can get to hope because I do take the time, I think, to not be sort of shy or coy about sort of violence that I think is all around us. So for me, like, they are connected. That hope thing is like a product of being honest. You know, I think maybe we actually need to spend more time being like that honesty, looking for that honesty. But then thinking about the surreal nature, or, you know, and that stuff, I sort of, for me, like, I write what I want, you know. If something I need for a story doesn't exist, I'll make it. And that's fun for me. That's an interesting, like, I kind of create problems for myself, and I think that keeps me engaged. Like, that story was hard to pull off. You gotta, like, a lot is going on, you know. So there's a town, and then, like, they explode every day, but they're getting strong, some of them. And, you know, there's a lot of all that weirdness, but to me, that's sort of fun. And I sort of create this space where now I can have these characters, the space, the premise, whatever I create is like sort of like a machine to kind of squeeze just as much as I can out of my characters. And that squeezing, that pressure I put on them becomes the story, and hopefully something meaningful happens, you know. And I try to be sort of, you know, rise to my best self through revision and try to be, you know, something like hopeful. But again, like, for me, that hopeful attitude is really, to me, you have to go through that sort of real honest place first.
I just want to remember the quote, they explode every day, but they're getting stronger.
Yeah, it's like, you know, regular stuff.
Well, I'll tell you one other thing that they all have in common, and maybe any one of you can grab this one, is that there are missing fathers. And this has a little something to do with hope, too. Every one of these books has, if in your short stories sometimes, but at certain points, a father who's gone, disappeared, mother doesn't know why, mother let him go, mother doesn't even know his name. In one of your stories, he had to, or sort of knew his name, but a character that has a father, but I don't want to give away too much, but I mean, but has a father, but it turns out it's not actually his biological father. So there's a lot of, I'm just curious about that because the stories are the novels are so different, the subject matter, the communities are different, but all of them deal with these mothers on their own, and doing a pretty good job, as a matter of fact, it turns out. But, or mothers who were seers, sort of, who speak almost in language that has to be deciphered, who were tough, like the one on your mother, I think. I'm sorry, maybe it's not your mother. It's literature, but there's a beautiful short story. But what were you going to say? Because you have a whole father thread in yours, and then you do too. Well, you do too, and you do too.
I don't think I was like trying to portray one way or another. I think men historically suck.
Triple out. I was gonna say,
and this is just what, you know, I was just writing from that. I don't have too much.
And don't you feel like the character's backstory, I mean, when we write a character and you think, why is he the way he is, why is she the way she is, you go back to the family. And I'm very interested in legacies of masculinity and this idea that your parent doesn't have to be your biological parent to be the one that nurtures you. But in An American Marriage, I have a character, he has his biological father, whom he meets in unusual circumstances, I'll say. And he has his stepfather who reared him, and he feels like he's cheating on his stepfather by having this secret relationship with his biological father, because we've come to think of family in such a way that only one person can be in each role. And I'm very interested in expanding the way we understand kin.
You have a reading, and I actually don't even know what it is, but it's from this book. So could you do a little reading? Because it must, I don't know if it
Doesn't have any fathers in it.
No father. But you'll still get a good idea.
This is near the beginning of the book, from the point of view of a newlywed wife on the day that her husband is sentenced. 12 years is what they gave him. We would be 43 years old when he was released. Roy understood that 12 years was an eternity because he sobbed right there at the defendant's table. His knees gave way and he fell into his chair. The judge paused and demanded that Roy bear this news on his feet. He stood again and cried, not like a baby, but in the way that only a grown man can cry, from the bottom of his feet, up through his torso, and finally through his lips. When a man wails like that, you know it's all the tears he was never allowed to shed, from Little League disappointment to teenage heartbreak, all the way up to whatever injured his spirit just last year. As Roy howled, my fingers kept worrying a rough patch of skin beneath my chin, a souvenir of scar tissue. When they did what I remember as kicking in the door, what everyone else remembers as opening it with the plastic key, after the door was open, however it was opened, we were both pulled from the bed. They dragged Roy into the parking lot, and I followed, lunging for him, wearing nothing but a white slip. Someone pushed me to the ground, and my chin hit the pavement. My slip rode up, showing everything to everyone, and my tooth sank into the soft skin of my bottom lip. Roy was on the asphalt beside me, barely beyond my grasp, speaking words that didn't reach my ears. I don't know how long we lay there, parallel like burial plots. Husband, wife, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder.
And he has been convicted of a rape he didn't commit. Speaking of kicking in the door. Jennifer, read, as long as we're reading, and I think we've done, let me just say one thing. The language that you're hearing right now, which I'm so glad you are, is a lot to do with why these books are so wonderful. It has everything to do with why these books are so wonderful. And so what you just heard is something that has to do with a very serious event, a terrifying event, and it happens in this country. And yet, it isn't the whole book ever. And this would kind of give a sense of it. You can tell us a little backstory.
Just to talk a little bit about the father thing. Gun love, the sort of inspiration in my mind was, blues songs, ballads, what you can learn from these songs. And so all these songs are about bad men, right?
They are.
I mean, even Louisiana Red said, how can you miss me, baby, with a pistol in your mouth? So it's all there. My mother was a cup of sugar. You could borrow her any time. My mother was so sweet. Her hands were always birthday parties sticky. Her breath held the 5 flavors of Lifesavers candy. And she knew all the love songs that are a university for love. She knew Slowly Walk Close to Me, Where Did You Sleep Last Night, Born Under a Bad Sign, and all the I'll kill you if you leave me songs. But sweetness is always looking for Mr. Bad, and Mr. Bad can pick out Miss Sweet in any crowd. My mother opened her mouth in a great wide O, and breathed him right into her body. I couldn't understand. She knew all the songs, so why would she get messed and stirred up with this man? When he said his name was Eli, she was down on her knees. His voice tamed her immediately. The first words he said were all she needed. He spoke, singing, I am your medicine, sweet baby. My, oh me, oh my, your name has always been written on my heart. And from there on, all he had to do was whistle for her.
All you all are thinking, I can see it in your faces through this whole, I'm not sure what you're thinking of, but does any one of you, what we've already talked about or what you think needs to be said, we've got another couple of last questions, but jump in.
I have a thought about hope in stories. I was thinking about, I think for me the question of hope also goes to the question of audience. Whenever I write a novel, I feel like I have like an A track and a B track. The A track is the melody, and I think that when I write a novel, I'm imagining it being read by people who can personally identify with what I'm talking about. And I feel like if I'm writing a novel, like For an American Marriage, about someone who's been wrongfully convicted, or even just people who are in prison, maybe they did commit the crime for which they were accused, but their liberty has been taken. And if I can't write a book, or if I can't imagine a world in which there is a way forward for that person, how would that feel to read such a story where you see yourself reflected and there is no possibility for you? I feel like if you write the book with an idea that you're going to tell people who don't know but need to know, there is an impulse to make it as bad as possible because you're trying to let someone know that this problem is a real problem. But I think when you do that at the expense of people who may be reading the book in a way to see themselves and to imagine something better. So to me, it's irresponsible to write without hope.
I totally second that. I was at I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was a science writer. He had a book called like Why Beavers Matter, I think is what it was called. And
Why what matter?
it was called Why Beavers Matter, I think.
Beavers.
It's about beavers.
The dance.
He was a science writer. He won one of the Penn Awards, and he said something that was really important though. It was about what he was saying was that it's important to, in regards to like climate change, but I think it applies to other arenas. He said for him hope is an ethical issue, and I kind of feel the same way because he said like a lot of like sort of climate change deniers have sort of pivoted from that it's not happening, that nothing can be done, and so hopelessness sort of inspires an action, actually, and so. For what he was saying is that it's essential to include hope. It's essential to say like there are avenues through which we can succeed, because it's important to know that there's real things at stake, and you don't want to like you said, present this person with their life that they may know and say like you're shit out of luck. You know what I mean? Or in this guy's case, or something along those lines. And in this guy's case, with the plan is at stake. We kind of can't afford to be like
I recently was talking to someone and saying that I believed in sort of a Trojan horse model for art, like to get it in and like, get it in with beauty or whatever is compelling about the art, and then have the message contained. But I'm just thinking right now in regards to hope, like that's a really violent sort of way to think about things. Like that's about like winning a war in secret, and it's really not a good metaphor. I'm not going to say it again. I feel like what you said, like unethical to not write in hope. I think what I love about art is its possibility for transformation for both the artist and the person experiencing the art, and that has to have hope for me. One of my most memorable reading experiences is not a good one. It was reading Albert Camus' The Stranger. And I finished it, and I got so sad I fell asleep. This is a weird thing. It was one of the deepest, most hopeless moments I've ever had. That I was so hopeless that I just fell asleep. It was the middle of the afternoon. I was not even tired.
Well, that's Camus. Yeah. Yeah. Oh dear. This sort of leads to something that might be something a little bit towards the end, because you write obviously theologically. You write because you must, as you've said yourself. But Jennifer, you've been a journalist. You work kind of in the real world. I mean, you all do, but I mean, you work in nonfiction. But this would apply to all of you. What is it that fiction can do, other than being a Trojan horse, to do something that can't be done with nonfiction?
I think it's the imagination where you can create the sympathetic imagination. So I think that you can create a place of greater empathy, which is why it can create so much social change, because your emotions are affected. And this is what's so extraordinary about the power of language. I mean, at least when I'm writing, I'm always trying to find how through language and the contradiction of metaphor can take you in a place where there is no God to find the godly, you know, or where the divine might exist with what is the most ugly. And that is something that language can do. And to me, it's very powerful.
Anybody else on that? Because I do think, you know, you're dealing with issues, but you're not, that's not even the language to say that. You're working with issues. You're bringing out issues and how, I'm not saying it's absolutely better, but how is it that's different?
I agree in the sense that I'm really interested in like sort of stretching the imagination of myself and the reader potentially. And sometimes not even with the issue, but also in sort of getting them to accept whatever new world. That's why where the surreal stuff comes in. You know, I think if you use like abolition, for example, like let's like with prisons, thinking about like, you know, if I don't think maybe prison should exist at all as they do. I think a lot of people think of abolition as like removal, but it's really about like creation. What can we imagine? What can we create that could like do this better? You know, so it's important to like, I don't know, cultivate sort of an imagination very actively, and not just in terms of like, for me anyways, doing this exact world. Sometimes making a whole new world, because that's kind of what I'm hoping for. You know, like whole paradigm shift. And so to me, fiction can do that really well, because I can say, hey, real quick, you don't know me, but I'm gonna let you accept this thing that is totally unfamiliar, you know? And I usually do it, like I get them to try to imagine a world that's a little bit worse. And then my kind of hope is that like in response, you like, wait, that same muscle, I can imagine a world that's a lot better, you know? And so that's kind of like, for me, I think that fiction can specifically do in a very specific way that I don't think other forms can do it in the same way.
I don't know if it's something about how I write or how I move through the world, but I often get people who assume that my works of fiction are life stories. And so they'll say, you know, I'm really sorry about your brother, for instance. And it's like, you know, my brother's still alive, but thank you. And, you know, my previous book was on a relationship between a mother who has dementia and her son, who's taking care of her. And there was a poster in another country, I think that was a language issue, and the poster said, David Chariandy abandoned his mother who was suffering from dementia and then wrote a novel about it. Please join us to listen to this royal a-hole. You know. But I guess, you know, I do oftentimes want to insist, you know, it's a work of fiction. I'm an artist. I'm not simply, you know, expressing myself. It's not simply my body I'm offering you or my experience I'm offering you. I'm a fiction writer, and I think about what that involves and all the responsibilities that involves, how to tell that story. But I guess to answer that question, I guess for me personally, in terms of writing stories, why I turn to fiction, it's the power of the question, what if? So what if my life was slightly different from the life I lived? You know, what if, rather than finding a way forward through the pursuit of a passion and through love and people who supported me, I despaired and a different life path opened up for me? What if I had an experience with a figure of authority that went sideways? What if any number of things? And I think for me that's a very powerful, I will say this, that's not a kind of a casual or a wild flight of the imagination. In a strange way, I lived the what if, because that's how you move through the world when these things are possible. And maybe fiction is a way of me somehow allowing and also exploring in not a scary way that question, and providing a story that I know could very easily be a story, but isn't.
Maybe we will run all through everybody, because it's
I sort of answered it a little bit before, but I think that one of the things as a journalist, you have such an honor pact with your reader that you will tell the truth, and the standard that that requires, which is actually an incredibly beautiful thing. I mean, because of I work in Penn, every day I'm in contact with people who risk their lives, their homeland, everything to tell the truth. It's something very different, that promise you give to your reader. So what's wonderful in fiction is that you give the reader something else, and that promise is not on the table. So for me, I prefer actually to be writing fiction than journalism because of the freedom that gives me.
I sometimes feel like some people are wired more, have more fiction minds. Like when I'm trying to write nonfiction, I'll find myself thinking, I know what would make this good. That's true. And you're not allowed to do that. And also, I feel like I write fiction with more confidence. When I'm writing nonfiction about people, I keep thinking, but what if that's not true? What if that's not true? But when I write fiction, I have more confidence because it's true because I say it's true. It's true in the world of this page. And I just feel like I just have so much more room. My father is always pressuring me to write nonfiction because he feels like that's when I'll reach my full potential. That's when I'm telling the truth, because Daddy is a political scientist, you know. But I feel that I am most myself when I am in that space of imagination. And part of writing for me, I believe in what we're talking about, that we write to try and make an impact and further conversations. But also, writing for me is a space of great pleasure. I feel like that sometimes gets lost. I think particularly with writers of color, the idea that art and literature is a site of joy and enjoyment also.
I had the painful experience of being fact-checked for a fiction piece that came out in the New Yorker. That was really intense. So the chapter that got published is very autobiographical, and the rest of the novel really isn't. But they contacted somebody at the University of Oklahoma, and because I'd used the word reservations to refer to where my dad grew up, this professor that they talked to was like, I don't think this person's met a single Native American person in their life. And, you know, it's like a very harsh statement. It's kind of typical of the way that in the Native world we sort of fact check each other for authenticity. And, you know, my dad uses it as sort of a shorthand for reference a certain type of life that he lived. It's technically tribal jurisdiction land, but that does not flow well when you're writing it on a page. And I told my dad about this, and he wanted her name. He was going to go after her for saying that. I think like you were just saying, this pleasure piece, I was just trying to write an essay in the second person to Amerigo Vespucci, America's namesake. It just, in the past couple days, turned into a fiction piece, and I felt like I was having fun. And like, this is what I want to do. This character who's writing a letter to Amerigo Vespucci is way more fun than me writing. I mean, either one might be a bad idea, and we'll see. But I agree with that. That's where I feel at home, and like I like to play with. It's like more like play, and that's, I think, when you feel like you're playing in doing art, I think you're in a good place.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you to all of our finalists for that wonderful conversation. We salute all of you and your books, and we hope that they will be on bookshelves and in public libraries and on college syllabi for many, many years to come. So thank you. Join me with one last. So before we get to our big announcement, we are going to try for round 2 of our video
Everyone
with
cross
volume.
your fingers. We'll see if it happens. Yes.
For nearly 50 years, Aspen Words has been connecting people through the power of stories. Ever since a band of bohemian poets and writers migrated to the Rocky Mountains in the 1970s, Aspen has been a hub of literary activity. Some of the most celebrated writers of our time have convened here to share stories and inspiration with writers and readers of all genres. At Aspen Words, we encourage writers, inspire readers, and lift up new voices. Steeped in the belief that stories have the power to transform thought and culture, we launched the Aspen Words Literary Prize in 2018 to spotlight fiction that illuminates a vital contemporary issue. At the heart of everything we do are the stories that shape our world. Stories that break down barriers, give voice to the voiceless, ignite empathy and compassion. Stories that reveal what it means to be alive at this time, that plumb the depths of the human spirit, take us to the outer reaches of imagination. Stories in which we get lost and wind up finding ourselves by connecting with others. Aspen, a place of solitude and communion, a place to retreat and create, a place to explore inner and outer landscapes, to gather and engage with words, written, spoken, dared, shared. Aspen, words celebrated, words elevated. Aspen Words.
So now that you have a little taste for Aspen, I want to draw your attention to this beautiful work of art on stage with us, which was actually created just down the road from our offices in Aspen. And big thank you to Anderson Ranch Arts Center and to artist Michael Lorsang for creating this work of art. And now, for the moment you've been waiting for, Samra.
Very exciting. Thank you. Thank you. All right. An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. It's very heavy.
Thank you to Aspen Words for this award, for having this award at all, because so many of us who want to write and engage the issues of the day, we're encouraged not to. We're told that that's not what real art does. And an award like this, I think it encourages all of us to keep following the strength of our convictions. And I also would like to thank my publisher, Algonquin Books, who has taken a chance on me and this book and the book before it. And my parents are not here, but I mean, they're here in the world. They're they're not in the room. They're home in Atlanta. And I owe them so much for giving me the opportunity to be the person I wanted to be as long as I did it in the service of justice. And finally, thank you to all of you all for helping us remember that books matter, that stories matter. When you're a writer, you know, people are constantly telling you that no one reads anymore, that everyone just, tweets. They tell you that, a Kindle is going to drown you in the bathtub. I feel like if you're black, they tell you a racist Kindle is going to drown you in the bathtub. But thank you for reminding us that what this work is important and makes a difference. Thank you so much.